Cold night, strange shadows. The town was quiet that night. Too quiet. A cold wind moved through the narrow streets, carrying small bits of paper and dust along the ground. Streetlights flickered in the distance, and the shadows between buildings seemed deeper than usual. It was the kind of night when most people stayed inside, near their heaters, sipping warm tea. But Daniel was still out. Walking home from his late shift at the workshop, he pulled his jacket tighter around himself, his breath making small white clouds in the freezing air. His shoes tapped softly on the wet pavement, and the only sound he heard was the wind whistling through empty alleyways. It felt like the whole town had gone to sleep, leaving him alone under the pale yellow lights. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the night. At first, it was soft, almost like the wind. But then he heard it again, a thin, trembling cry. It wasn't the cry of a cat or a baby from inside a home. It was different, sharp and strange, as if someone was hurt and afraid at the same time. Daniel stopped walking, his eyes searching the shadows. The sound came again, this time from an alley to his right. The entrance was narrow, and the light from the street didn't reach far inside. For a moment, Daniel thought about walking away. It wasn't his problem, and strange things sometimes brought trouble. But something in that cry pulled at him. It was too weak, too desperate to ignore. Slowly, he stepped into the alley. The walls on both sides were close, and the smell of damp garbage filled the air. Somewhere near the back, half hidden by old boxes, he saw movement. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and then he froze there, crouched against the wall. Was a tall, thin figure. The figure was wrapped in torn, dirty fabric, the kind that looked like it had once been a cloak. Beside it was a smaller shape, curled up tight. Two glowing eyes peered out from under the fabric, not the red glow of an animal, but a soft, deep blue. The glow made Daniel's heart race. Those eyes were watching him, studying him. The taller figure moved slightly, shifting to place itself between Daniel and the small one. It was a protective gesture. Then, as the fabric shifted, Daniel saw their skin. It shimmered faintly in the dim light, not pale like a human, not dark like the earth, but a soft silver, almost like moonlight on water. It was nothing he had ever seen before. The smaller one whimpered again, the tall figure, a woman. Daniel realized, reached down to comfort it, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was gentle but filled with worry. She looked up at him, her eyes not glowing like the child's, but still holding a strange light. There was no anger in them, only fear. Daniel raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman hesitated, pulling her cloak tighter around the child. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Only the sound of the wind filled the space between them. Then the woman spoke. Her words broken and slow, warm. "Safe?" she asked, her accent strange but understandable. Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said. "I can help you." The child looked up at him, its small face pale under the dim light. Its skin was the same silver tone as the mother's. It didn't look dangerous. It looked tired, cold, and hungry. Daniel took off his coat and bent down, holding it out. The child looked at the mother, who nodded carefully. The child stepped forward and took the coat, wrapping it around itself. Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was afraid. These two were not human, and he didn't know what that meant. But another part of him felt a deep pull to protect them. They were out here in the freezing cold, clearly with nowhere to go. Whatever they were in trouble. "Come with me," Daniel said quietly. The woman stood, her tall, thin frame casting a long shadow on the wall. She took the child's hand, and together they followed him out of the alley. As they stepped into the streetlight, Daniel noticed marks on the woman's skin, thin, dark lines like burns or scars. She kept glancing over her shoulder as they walked, her eyes scanning the darkness behind them. Daniel wondered if someone had hurt them, or worse, if someone was still looking for them. The streets were still empty, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. Somewhere out there, in the cold night, something might be watching, and for the first time, Daniel realized this night was going to change his life forever. The first step of kindness Daniel led them through the silent streets, the cold air. Bit at his face, but he walked quickly, wanting to get them somewhere warm. The woman's footsteps were light and quiet, almost too quiet for someone her size. The child, wrapped in Daniel's coat, stayed close to her side. Glancing at him every now and then, with those strange glowing eyes, it was as if the child was studying him, trying to decide if he could be trusted. They reached the narrow staircase that led to Daniel's small apartment. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen, but it was dry. And it was safe. Daniel opened the door and held it for them. The woman hesitated at the threshold, her eyes scanning the hallway as if expecting danger to leap out. Only when she was sure it was clear did she guide the child inside. The warmth from the old radiator filled the room. Daniel switched on a dim lamp, not wanting to startle them with bright light. The woman moved to the far corner of the room, keeping her back to the wall. The child sat on the floor beside her, still wrapped in the oversized coat. Daniel noticed their bare feet, thin, pale, and slightly translucent at the edges, as if the skin wasn't quite like human skin at all. Without saying much, Daniel went into the kitchen. He didn't have much food, just some bread, instant noodles, and a few cans. But it would have to do. He boiled some water and made the noodles when he brought the steaming bowls to them. The woman didn't touch hers at first. She waited until Daniel tasted his own, almost like she was making sure it wasn't poisoned. Only then did she hand the other bowl to the child. The child ate quickly but carefully, as if taught not to waste a single drop. After a few minutes, the woman spoke. Her voice was low, the words slow and heavy with an unfamiliar accent. "My name?" "Lyra," she said, touching her chest. She then rested a hand on the child's head. "Kale," Daniel nodded, giving his own name in return. He wanted to ask where they came from, but something told him to be patient. Lyra's eyes flickered to the window, scanning the street below. Her body was tense, like she was always ready to run. "Someone after you?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm. Lyra's gaze returned to him, and she gave a single slow nod. "Hunters," she said, quietly, the words sounding heavy in her mouth. Daniel frowned. "Police?" She shook her head. "Not your police. They take Kale." Her voice shook slightly on her son's name. The child Kale was staring at the radiator, small hands stretched toward it, feeling the heat. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw faint patterns glowing under Kale's skin, thin lines like rivers of light. But when he blinked, they were gone. He wondered if it was just his imagination. Lyra pulled the coat tighter around Kale. "Cold." "Bad for him," she said. Daniel nodded. "You can stay tonight." Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected kindness from a stranger. She looked at him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. Time passed slowly. Daniel could feel the unspoken tension in the room. It wasn't just fear. It was the feeling of someone who had been hunted for a long time, someone who no longer believed there was a safe place. He didn't know who these hunters were, or why they wanted the boy, but he knew one thing. He couldn't throw them back out into the freezing night. Kale began to yawn, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. Lyra guided him to a blanket Daniel had placed on the floor. The boy curled up under it, holding the coat close. Daniel noticed Lyra didn't lie down. Instead, she sat beside the sleeping child, her back against the wall, eyes half closed but still alert. Even in rest, she didn't let herself relax completely. Daniel sat at his small table, pretending to read an old newspaper, but really just watching them. They looked so out of place in his tiny apartment. Yet somehow it felt right that they were here. He thought about how strange life was, how one small choice, like walking into that alley, could change everything. Outside, the wind picked up again. The building creaked. And somewhere far away, a low hum echoed faintly. Daniel glanced at Lyra. She had heard it too. Her eyes opened fully, sharp and alert. The sound faded, but the air in the room felt heavier. Daniel didn't know what that hum was, but from Lyra's expression, he knew it wasn't good for now, though. The apartment was quiet. Cale's breathing was soft and steady. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He told himself he would ask questions in the morning, but deep down, he already knew the night was only the beginning. Whatever had brought Lyra and Cale here was not finished with them yet, and now, somehow, he was part of it too. A small shelter in a big world. The morning light was pale when Daniel woke. He had dozed off in his chair, the old newspaper still open on the table. For a moment, he thought the events of the night were just a strange dream. Then he saw the blanket in the corner and remembered. Cale was awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The boy was holding Daniel's coffee mug, empty, and turning it slowly in his hands. Daniel blinked. The mug was floating, not resting on Cale's palms. It hung in the air, spinning gently. When Cale noticed Daniel watching, the mug dropped softly into his hands, as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel sat forward, his voice low. "You did that?" Cale tilted his head but didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward Lyra, who was standing near the window, her eyes scanning the street below. Her posture was tense, but not panicked. She seemed to be listening to something Daniel couldn't hear. "You slept?" Daniel asked, trying to sound casual. Lyra shook her head. "Not safe to sleep." "Too long," she said, her voice rough from the cold air. Her gaze flicked to Cale, who was now tracing patterns on the floor with his finger. Where his finger passed, faint lines of light glimmered before fading away. Daniel stared. It was like the boy was drawing with sunlight. Lyra moved closer, speaking softly. "We travel far." "Long way," she said. Daniel tried to keep his question simple. "From another country?" Lyra shook her head slowly. Her eyes met his, and she said, "From another sky." The words sent a chill through him. She was telling him they weren't just from another place on Earth. They were from somewhere far beyond. He had guessed they weren't human, but hearing it was different. It made the air in the small apartment feel heavier. Daniel brought them some bread and fruit from the kitchen. Cale smiled faintly as he took the food. For a moment, the boy seemed almost like any other child, hungry, quiet and shy. But Daniel could still see the faint glow in his eyes, the shimmer of his skin when the light hit it just right. "Why are you here?" Daniel asked gently. Lyra hesitated, then spoke. "War," she said simply. Her hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. "Hunters find those who run. Take children." Daniel didn't like the way she said take. It carried a weight that didn't need more explanation. Outside, the street began to wake. A delivery truck rumbled past, and the sound of footsteps echoed on the pavement. Lyra stepped back from the window, pulling the curtain closed. Cale was watching her closely, as if reading her mood without words. Daniel noticed how the boy's small hand brushed her arm, and her tense shoulders eased just slightly. It was like he could calm her without speaking. Daniel thought about what to do next. If the hunters were real, and from what he'd seen, he had no reason to doubt it, then Lyra and Cale couldn't stay here long. But where could they go? He didn't know anyone who could hide two alien refugees, and even if he did, it would be dangerous for them too. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flicker in the air near the door. It was quick, like heat rising from a road. Lyra saw it too. She moved instantly, putting herself between Cale and the door. Her eyes locked with Daniel's. "They are close," she said, her voice sharp but quiet. Daniel's heart began to race. He didn't hear anything outside, but he believed her. Something in her tone made him trust her completely. She crouched beside Cale, whispering in their own language. The boy nodded, and his glowing eyes brightened just slightly. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time he saw not just fear, but hope. "You know this place," she said. "You can hide us." Daniel didn't know why he agreed so quickly. Maybe it was the way Cale's small hand clung to his coat. Maybe it was the thought of those hunters taking the boy. Whatever the reason, he nodded. All right. But we move now. Lyra gave the smallest of smiles, a rare, fleeting thing. Before lifting Cale into her arms, Daniel grabbed his keys, his heart pounding. As they stepped into the cold morning air, he felt a strange awareness, the world around him seemed sharper, the shadows deeper, and somewhere out there, unseen, something was looking for them. The hunters arrived. The air outside felt sharper. Daniel led Lyra and Cale through the back streets, avoiding the main road. It was early morning, but the cold kept most people indoors. The few passers-by didn't pay attention to them, just three figures moving quickly through the chill. But Lyra's eyes kept scanning every shadow, every rooftop. Daniel noticed she was breathing faster, her body tense like a bowstring. They were halfway down a narrow lane when it began. A low hum rolled through the air, so deep it seemed to pass through Daniel's chest. It wasn't the sound of a car or a plane. It was something stranger. More alive. Lyra froze, one hand gripping Cale's shoulder. The boy's glowing eyes widened, his gaze snapping to the far end of the lane. Daniel followed their eyes and saw it, a ripple in the air. At first, it looked like heat haze, but it moved against the wind. Then shapes began to emerge from it, tall and black, their outlines bending the light around them. Each figure was wrapped in smooth, dark armor that reflected nothing. Where a face should be, there was only a flat, glassy surface. It shimmered faintly, as if it was showing a reflection from somewhere far away. They moved without footsteps, each motion too precise, too smooth to be human. Long, jointed limbs bent in ways that made Daniel's skin crawl. In their hands were weapons unlike anything he had seen, long rods that hummed with a faint vibration. The sound from the rods mixed with the deep hum in the air. It made the street feel heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Lyra whispered something to Cale in her own language. The boy's glow brightened slightly, and he pressed closer to her side. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was a warning. The hunters began to spread out, scanning the narrow street with slow, careful movements. One of them turned its faceless head in their direction. Daniel felt his heart lurch. Go, Lyra said sharply, grabbing his arm. They slipped into a side passage between two crumbling buildings. The cold bricks scraped Daniel's shoulder. As they hurried through, behind them, the hum grew louder. Daniel glanced back just in time to see one of the hunters tilt its head toward the passage. A pulse of pale blue light swept across the wall like a scanning beam. Lyra pushed Cale ahead and moved faster. They reached a wider street, but it was no safer. Above them, something moved in the sky, a smooth black shape without wings or engines. It glided silently, its surface shifting like liquid metal. A thin beam of light swept over the rooftops, searching. Lyra pulled them under the shadow of a delivery truck, pressing Cale close. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. For a moment, everything was still. Then one of the hunters stepped into view at the far end of the street. It tilted its head again, and the glassy surface of its face shimmered. Shapes appeared in it, not a reflection of the street, but symbols in strange shifting patterns Daniel didn't understand. The hunter raised its weapon, and the hum deepened. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. Whatever that thing could do, he didn't want to find out. Lyra made a quick decision. She reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a small, flat device. It was no bigger than her hand, its surface etched with glowing lines. She pressed her fingers in a pattern, and the air around them shimmered faintly. The sound of the hum dulled, like a door had been closed. Daniel realized she had just hidden them, not physically, but somehow masked them from being seen. The hunter's head moved slowly, scanning the area. It paused near the truck. Daniel held his breath. Cale pressed his face into Lyra's chest, his small hands gripping the fabric tightly. The hunter lingered for a long, unbearable moment, then turned away, moving down another street. The hum faded. But Lyra didn't relax. She looked at Daniel and spoke quickly. They "No, we hear." But not long. Her voice was firm, but Daniel could hear the urgency in it. The small device in her hand was still glowing faintly, but the light was fading. "Where do we go?" Daniel asked. Lyra's eyes swept the rooftops, the alleys, the sky. Finally, she pointed toward the industrial edge of town, where old warehouses stood like sleeping giants. "Hide there," she said. "Only for a short time." They began to move again. Faster now. The streets were still empty, but the air felt different, heavier. Daniel knew the hunters hadn't given up. They were just waiting for the next chance to strike. Running in the shadows, the warehouses loomed ahead like silent giants. Their windows were dark, their walls streaked with years of rust and rain. Daniel led Lyra and Cale through a gap in the chain-link fence, the metal wires cold against his hands. The air smelled of oil and dust, and the only sound was the faint echo of their footsteps on broken concrete. Lyra moved like she had been here before. She kept to the walls, avoiding open spaces, her eyes scanning every shadow. Cale stayed close. But Daniel noticed something strange. The boy's eyes were brighter now, faint trails of light following. When he moved his head, it was beautiful and dangerous. Anyone looking from a distance could see that glow. They slipped inside an old warehouse through a side door hanging loose on its hinges. Inside, the air was colder, heavy with the smell of rust. Dust floated in the weak light that slipped through broken roof panels. They made their way between stacks of old crates and machinery. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. He didn't know if it was from the cold or from the fear of what might be following them. Then they heard it, a faint metallic click, far away but sharp in the still air. Lyra froze instantly, raising a hand for silence. Cale's small fingers tightened on Daniel's sleeve. Daniel's skin prickled. The sound had come from the far end of the building. Lyra whispered something to Cale. The boy nodded and closed his eyes for a moment. Nothing happened. Then Daniel noticed the air around them shift slightly. It felt warmer, thicker, like the space itself was wrapping around them. The faint creak of the roof and the hum of distant machinery seemed to fade. Lyra looked at Daniel, her voice low. "He hides us," she said, nodding toward Cale. Daniel's eyes widened. Cale was shielding them somehow, masking their presence. But then, from the shadows, came another sound, a low, rising hum, the same deep tone Daniel had heard before. It crawled into his bones from the darkness between the crates. Two hunters emerged. They moved slowly, their faceless heads tilting side to side. Daniel felt Cale's glow flicker. The boy's face strained with effort. The hunters paused. Scanning, one raised its weapon. A faint vibration running through the air. Lyra made a quick motion with her hand. Cale's eyes flared brighter, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly, the hunters' heads turned away, as if something had drawn their attention elsewhere. They moved toward the opposite side of the warehouse. Daniel exhaled slowly, but Lyra's expression stayed tense. "Not long," she whispered. "Too close." They began to move again, slipping through the maze of crates toward another exit. Daniel stayed close behind Lyra, keeping an eye on Cale. The boy's glow was dimming, and his steps were slower. Now, whatever he was doing to hide them was taking his strength. Then, a sharp sound echoed through the building, the crash of metal hitting the floor. The hunters turned instantly, their weapons humming louder. Daniel's breath caught. They had been found. Lyra grabbed Cale and pulled him forward. "Run," she said, her voice sharper than he had heard before. They darted between crates, the heavy thud of the hunter's steps following. A blue beam of light cut through the shadows, slicing across the walls and floor. It passed within inches of Daniel, leaving a faint scorch mark where it touched a crate. They burst through a side door into the open air. Cold wind hit them, but they didn't stop. The yard outside was wide and empty. Too exposed, Daniel thought. Lyra seemed to think the same. She veered toward a row of abandoned train cars on the far side. The hunters followed, their movements smooth and tireless. Cale twisted in Lyra's arms, looking back. A sudden pulse of light shot from his small hands. Hitting the ground in front of the hunters, it exploded into a wall of shimmering heat. The hunters slowed, moving cautiously around it. Daniel realized Cale wasn't just hiding them. He could fight back. But using that power made the boy's glow fade even faster. By the time they reached the train cars, Cale's head was resting against Lyra's shoulder, his eyes only faintly lit. Daniel climbed into the nearest car, pulling them up after him. Inside, it was dark and smelled of old metal and dust. They crouched low, listening. Outside, the hunters moved past slowly, scanning. One paused right beside the car, its faceless head tilting as if it sensed something. Then it moved on, the hum fading into the distance. For now, they were safe. But Daniel knew the hunters wouldn't stop. Cale had saved them twice today, but the boy was weakening. And if they didn't find a place to hide soon, his abilities wouldn't be enough. The last hiding place. The train car stayed dark and still. Daniel could hear Cale's breathing, slow but uneven, and the faint creak of the old metal around them. The boy's glow had almost faded completely. Only a soft shimmer remained in his eyes, like the last light before nightfall. Lyra crouched beside him, her long fingers brushing his hair back. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows through a small gap in the wall. Daniel sat across from them, his back against the cold steel. His mind was racing. The hunters had been close, too close. If they had turned their heads a moment earlier, they would all be gone. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice low. "We cannot keep running." Her words were heavy, not just from her accent, but from the truth in them. Daniel nodded slowly. "They won't stop, will they?" Lyra shook her head. "They follow until we gone." She reached under her cloak and pulled out something flat and metallic. It looked like a piece of polished stone at first, but when she tapped its surface, it came alive with thin lines of light. The lights moved like rivers, shifting and changing, forming symbols Daniel couldn't read. "This calls my people," she said. Her fingers moved quickly across the glowing lines. The device gave off a soft hum, warmer than the hunter's sound. It was the kind of hum that seemed to promise safety. Daniel leaned closer, watching as shapes formed above the device. Tiny glowing maps, swirling like smoke in the air. "How does it work?" he asked. Lyra glanced at him. "It needs charge," she said. Her gaze dropped to Cale, who was still breathing slowly. "He can give it power." Daniel's brow furrowed. "But he's already weak." Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, that is choice." The meaning hit Daniel. Using the device now could drain Cale even more. But without it, they had no way to call for help. The hunters would find them eventually. Daniel looked at the boy, small and silent at his mother's arms. Cale's eyes opened slightly, meeting Daniel's. There was no fear there, just a quiet understanding, as if the boy already knew what had to happen. Before Daniel could speak, a distant hum rolled through the air. It was faint, but he knew the sound instantly. The hunters were near. Lyra's head turned toward the open gap in the wall. Her eyes narrowed. "They search every place. They come here soon." She set the device on the floor between them. Cale reached out, his small fingers brushing the glowing surface. The lines of light brightened instantly. Flowing faster, Daniel could see the boy's skin shimmering faintly. As the energy left him, his breathing slowed further, and Lyra held him close. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes told another story, fear and something deeper. The glowing map above the device shifted, showing a new shape, a circle of light spinning slowly. Lyra's voice softened. "Portal to safe place." Daniel's heart pounded. "So you'll leave?" Lyra met his gaze. "Yes, but it takes time to open." Daniel's thoughts churned. The hunters were minutes away. The boy was fading, and the device still glowed faintly. He looked around the dark train car, knowing it wouldn't hold against the hunters for long. "We need to slow them down," he said. Lyra studied him. "You stay?" The question hit him harder than he expected. She was asking if he would risk himself so they could escape. Daniel thought about the alley, about the freezing night when he first saw them. He could have walked away, but he hadn't, and now walking away wasn't an option. "I'll buy you time," he said finally. Lyra's eyes softened, just for a moment. Before she gave a small nod, she placed her hand on his arm. "Daniel, humans are better than I was told." Her voice was quiet, but the weight in it stayed with him. The hum outside grew louder. Daniel moved to the door of the train car. Glancing back one last time, Lyra was holding Cale, the device glowing brightly now. The air around them shimmered faintly, as if something unseen was already beginning to form. Daniel stepped into the cold air. The yard was empty, but the sound of the hunters was close, too close. He gripped a loose piece of metal in his hand. He didn't know if it would help, but it was better than nothing. Somewhere behind him, in that train car, a portal to another world was opening, and he was going to make sure they reached it. Rescue and goodbye. The cold air stung Daniel's face as he stepped out into the yard. The hum of the hunters was louder now, rolling through the stillness like a warning. Shadows moved at the far end, tall black shapes gliding between the train cars, their faceless heads tilted, scanning. Daniel gripped the metal bar tighter, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He stepped into the open, letting them see him. For a moment, the hunters froze. Then one turned toward him, the surface of its face shifting with strange symbols. The hum deepened, vibrating in Daniel's chest. He swallowed hard but forced himself to keep moving. "Over here," he muttered under his breath. Though they couldn't understand, the first hunter advanced, weapon in hand. Daniel swung the metal bar, hitting it across the arm. The impact made a dull sound, and the hunter barely flinched. It moved with sudden speed. Grabbing the bar and tossing it aside like paper, Daniel stumbled back, his heart pounding. He didn't have to win. He just had to keep them busy. From the corner of his eye, he saw a faint shimmer in the air behind him. The portal was opening. It was brighter now, a swirling circle of light just visible through the gap in the train car. He could hear Lyra's voice inside, low and urgent. Speaking to Cale, the hunters moved closer, spreading out. Daniel stepped back slowly. Keeping their attention, one raised its weapon. A low whine building at the tip, Daniel darted sideways, the beam slicing past and scorching the wall of a nearby car. His pulse hammered in his ears. Another hunter leapt forward, but Daniel ducked between two crates. The cold metal scraped his arms, but he kept moving. He needed to buy them seconds. Just seconds. Behind him, a sharp, high sound cut through the air, the device in Lyra's hands reaching full power. The light from the portal spilled out in a soft, steady glow. Daniel risked a glance and saw Lyra holding Cale close. Her body half turned toward him. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. She mouthed two words, "Thank you." The hunters must have sensed it too. They turned toward the light, moving fast. Daniel stepped into their path, shoving a crate to block them. The wooden frame splintered under their strength, but it slowed them for an instant, enough for Lyra to step into the portal. Cale in her arms, the glow surrounded them, soft and otherworldly. Cale's eyes met Daniel's one last time. The boy lifted a small hand, and something light and warm flew into Daniel's palm. A crystal, glowing faintly. The hunters pushed past the broken crate, their movements sharp, but the portal was already shrinking. The light folding in on itself, Lyra stepped fully through, Cale still watching him until the last second. Then the light snapped shut, leaving only the cold gray of the yard. The hunters stopped, their faceless heads turning slowly. They scanned the empty space where the portal had been. One tilted its head toward Daniel. For a long, tense moment, he thought they might attack, but then they stepped back, their bodies blurring at the edges. The hum faded, and they dissolved into the air like shadows in the sun. Silence settled over the yard. Daniel stood there, the crystal still glowing softly in his hand. It felt warm, almost alive, when he turned it. Faint lines of light moved inside it, forming shapes he didn't recognize. He didn't know what it was. A thank you, a memory, or a way to call them again someday. But he knew it was important. He slipped the crystal into his pocket and looked at the empty space where the portal had been. A part of him felt lighter knowing they were safe. Another part felt heavier, knowing they were gone. The cold wind moved through the yard, carrying the faint smell of rust and rain. Daniel turned and began walking back toward the town. The night in the alley had changed him, and deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Somewhere, under another sky, Lyra and Kale were alive, and maybe one day their paths would cross again.